sia di Toronto che di Lontano, ma questo è un evento del congresso di Toronto. Stiamo festeggiando in questi giorni, ieri sono stato 80 anni che l'Italia è diventata una repubblica, quindi siamo tutti in festa. Questo è il mese dedicato all'Italia, quindi ne siamo veramente tutti felici. È entrato anche il nostro Marti Bollo, che è stato l'artefice a far diventare questo mese dedicato all'Italia da parte del governo. Però 80 anni fa, quando avvenne questo evento eccezionale dell'Italia dalla monarchia a passare in Repubblica, furono anni veramente difficili per gli italiani, che molti erano poveri, e quindi tanti si sono praticamente sobbarcati il coraggio di attraversare l'oceano, andare chi verso l'Australia, chi verso il Brasile, l'Argentina, Stati Uniti, Canada, con i galli alle mani, come dicevo l'altra volta, per il duro lavoro, con gli occhi tristi per i tristi addio, e sono venute da quest'altra parte dell'oceano per cercare di migliorare se stessi e le proprie famiglie. Ci sono riusciti, hanno avuto un lavoro eccezionale, quelli che sono venuti prima di noi hanno realizzato delle cose magnifiche. Alcuni dicevano, non ricordo, mi sapeva Lorna Jackson dicendo: vedete giù lo skyline di Toronto? Molti di quei palazzi sono stati fatti dagli italiani, ma molti di quei palazzi oggi sono proprietà. È stato un grande successo. Provavamo il bisogno, sentivamo il bisogno di fare in modo che questi successi, che queste storie meravigliose, di questo coraggio, eccetera, non venisse dimenticate nel tempo. Quindi bisognava in qualche modo metterle in un libro, 2 libri. Noi abbiamo realizzato 2 libri. Il congresso ha realizzato 2 libri, grazie anche al lavoro immenso del nostro professor Bolotta, che vi presenterò fra poco, e ai suoi collaboratori. E le storie così non saranno dimenticate. Ricordiamo, lo dico sempre, noi viviamo e moriamo 2 volte, uno quando ce ne andiamo, la seconda quando nessuno parlerà più di noi. Questi documenti, queste storie resteranno nel tempo. Proprio 3 giorni fa, professore, una delle tue pubblicazioni, il nostro amico, come si chiama, quello che è morto, ti ho detto l'altro giorno, Pietro, ecco questo qua. Immaginate che 60 anni fa lui praticamente stava a Marcinelle quando è scoppiato l'incendio che ha ammazzato oltre 100 persone. È salito sopra solo mezz'ora prima. Dopodiché, quando è successo quella tragica cosa, ha preso la nave, è partito dalle Havre, è venuto in Canada. La sua storia non sarà mai dimenticata. Fra 100 anni sarà letta da qualcheduno e quindi vivrà per sempre. Adesso probabilmente il professor Bolotta ne parlerà anche un attimo. Ma ci sono delle storie interessantissime. Dobbiamo fare in modo che questa legacy, noi diciamo sempre, noi oggi conosciamo la storia dei Romani, degli Aztechi, dei Greci, perché qualcuno l'ha scritta. Non conosciamo quella degli inglesi, anche se oggi qui ancora noi siamo una repubblica, dopo 80 anni qui ancora c'è una monarchia, non mi spiego perché, ma questo è un discorso che faremo in altre occasioni, no? C'è questo. Non conosciamo quella dell'inglese prima dell'anno 1000 perché nessuno l'ha scritta. Noi sentivamo il bisogno di scrivere questa storia. Il congresso l'ha abbracciata, l'ha fatto per noi, per voi e per le future generazioni. Io vi presento adesso la persona che ha lavorato per anni per mettere insieme questo lavoro, il professor Angelo Bolotta, che chiedo a tutti voi di applaudire perché ha stato fatto lui e insieme ai suoi collaboratori un lavoro veramente eccezionale. Grazie Angelo, prego.
Thank you very much. This was a labor of love, not just by me, but my entire family and our entire community, because we realized that as an Italian-Canadian community, we don't have too many opportunities given to us to celebrate what we have accomplished in this country and to celebrate how we have built a better country than what we found when we came here, and a better family opportunity so that we wouldn't be facing the shackles of poverty like many generations before us had to face with no way out. So these are important stories to tell, not just because of Italian essence, but because they reveal the innermost pillars of our humanity. I invite all immigrants, regardless of where in the world you're coming from, to compare your experiences to those of Italian-Canadian immigrants, to see what's similar, what's different, and what does that teach us about our common humanity. And so as we gather tonight, we're here to celebrate the launch of Italian Heritage Month, but we're also here for various other reasons too. One of the things that we must remember, as an example, last December, Italian cooking was awarded a special cultural heritage of humanity status by the United Nations Cultural Agency, UNESCO. Have you heard about that? Yes. And this is the very first time that an entire national cuisine has been recognized that way for its efficient use of natural resources, for its waste-free and making. I remember when I was a kid, every piece, when the pig was slaughtered, and I was almost a member of the family we were talking about, because in our village the pig lived in the basement. Yeah, exactly. And what would happen was not a single part of that animal would be wasted. Even the bones were cooked to produce soap. And that's what we learned, and that's what we have brought to this country too. So as we look at things like this, let's celebrate our Italianità, and let's celebrate also our Canadian adopted home. So we proudly, in this month, celebrate all things Italian, like our peasant food that became gourmet food all of a sudden, like our, and I'm just using the example of Giorgio Armani, but our fashion designers who became state-of-the-art designers, and my favorite Ferrari. It seems that what we do well. My thesis is that's because we do it with passion. And this is what tonight's conversations are going to reveal for you. But we have to remember, too, that it's not just about things. When we celebrate all things Italian during Italian Heritage Month, let's remember that the most important things in life aren't necessarily things. The most important things in life are people. And let's celebrate that, too. Let's not forget that. So, as we proudly celebrate this month, let's recognize also over slightly more than 150 people contributed stories to this project. And not just from the GTA or from Toronto, from coast to coast, from Newfoundland all the way to British Columbia, and north all the way to Yellowknife, contributing stories to talk about their experiences coming to Canada and what they were able to accomplish in the end. Very important. And so as we look at these stories, we can be proud, honestly proud, of what we and our fellow Italians have accomplished. And let's stop being shy about it. Let's not be braggarts, but at the same time, let's recognize that we have done a lot to help Canada become the country we're so proud of today. We have done our share. Now, George Santayana, Spanish-American philosopher, once wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And that always stuck with me because history has to be not only important, but it has to be made to seem and be important. Otherwise, it gets forgotten. It gets set aside. And sure enough, you end up repeating the same mistakes and the same failures. So Well, what we're doing this evening as well is to remember Pietro Quadrini. And Pietro, an amazing man. I got to meet him when he agreed to add his story to the National Collection. And there he is on the day of that great mining disaster, April the 8th, 1956, in Marcinelle, Belgium. 262 miners lost their lives in one giant explosion. And in his story, he was telling me how lucky he was to have survived, because he and his two partners finished the work assigned to them, and then they couldn't find their supervisor, so they decided, okay, well, let's start climbing up the shaft so we can see if he's up top. Once they made their way up to the top, there was a major explosion. And everyone that was still down there lost their lives instantly. And of those 162, almost 190 were Italians, working as slave laborers, because they weren't being protected by the Belgian government, and they weren't being protected by their own Italian government. And it's sad that the conditions were that unsafe. But Pietro, when I asked him what regrets he had, he said, no, I couldn't continue to work there because I felt that I should have been down there with my colleagues. But at the same time, I was grateful to have been given a second chance of life. When he came out of the mine, that's what he looked like. That was taken by a Belgian photographer on the day of the accident. And he came to Canada, worked in Canada, saw that the working conditions could stand for some improvement, but they were much better than what he had experienced back in Belgium. And so I said, well, what do you think you learned from your experience? And he said that workers must always, when they see that they're being put into dangerous circumstances, they must stand up. They must stand up for their rights. They must stand up for workplace safety. And I said to myself, yeah, he's absolutely right. And we've come a long way in Canada, but we've got to remember not to let that go, to keep moving forward with making a safer working environment, as opposed to saying, well, our work here now is now done, let's move on to some other issue. And so remembering Pietro for me is important, and he was so proud of the fact that back in Italy he served as a Barcelliere. And his biggest sadness, that although he worked in foundries and mines and poisonous environments his whole life, his wife predeceased him. And that broke his heart. He expected to go long before because of the conditions he had to face every day. But the simplicity and the honesty, powerful stories. And that's just one example of what the collection is all about. One of the reasons why I was so interested in this project, this is a page from a Canadian history textbook that I was the lead author for back in 2000. It's basically my father's story of coming to Canada. And the reason why it's important is not because it's my father's story, but it's important because it represents the first time that the specific personal experiences of Italian immigrants appeared in a textbook approved for use in Canadian schools. We started coming here by the tens of thousands after 1950. It took 50 years, a half a century, for us to be recognized as humans with personal experiences and having to make sacrifices and leaving family behind and doing all kinds of things that we had to do to produce a better life. And to to me, that reminded me, when this book was then published, I was doing workshops across the province, and many Italians came to me, some with tears in their eyes, saying, I can't believe it's finally happened. I can't believe it's finally happened. Sault Ste. Marie, Welland, Ottawa, wherever we were doing workshops, they would come up, the teachers would come up and say, I'm Italian, I'm so happy to see this because it finally happened. And that's what convinced me that these stories are important. And that's why I stuck with it for all these years. So now what we have, as we proudly celebrate Canadian history, we have these beautiful volumes that look at the experiences and accomplishments of Italian Canadians coast to coast. And we now have in writing and in book form a part of Canadian history that has been up until now too often overlooked, and that needed to be corrected. 101 powerful stories in each volume, and $60 per volume. Any of you in education know that for a school textbook, and these have been manufactured as if they were school textbooks for endurance, a 450 or a 490 page textbook would not sell for $60, it would sell for twice that. But the community came up and raised funds to subsidize the publication, and I'm grateful for that because now it's made affordable so that we can all share it with our children, our grandchildren, our neighbors, and that's how it becomes history. Donate them to libraries, donate them to historical archives, donate them to universities, and that's what has started to happen. Now, as we understand our nation, if we reflect on it a little bit, for me, the Honorable Frank Iacobucci was an important benchmark for this project because he was one of the first people we approached who had status as a known Italian, the only Italian to ever serve on the Supreme Court of Canada. There wasn't one before, and there hasn't been one since. And when he heard about the project, he said, yes, come. We visited him in his office downtown, and when we explained what we were trying to do, he said, okay, let's tell the story. And his message was very influential for myself and the whole writing team. Because his point was, you know, if people want to find out about me, they can just look me up. I want you to focus on the experiences of my mother and my father, because the sacrifices they went through to come together and build a family and raise us and allow us to be educated. Powerful story. And I wouldn't be here without them. And so we focused on telling his and their story together, and he was very happy with it and signed off on it right away, and he's been a project supporter ever since. And one thing he reminded us in his conclusion to the story is that we have to sometimes remember to look past our differences and to take a transcultural approach. Not just multicultural. Multicultural is important, but also transcultural. Because it's important for us to recognize the common humanity that exists across cultures. And he's the one who planted that seed in our head as a writing team, and we continue to work towards that ever since. So in our land of immigrants, which Canada is often described as, there you have 4, what we used to call in the old days, sojourners, who were coming to Canada to work, but without their families. They left their families behind, just as my father had to do. And that was 1952, that first photo. The second photo, 1959, and you can see that by then, entire families were starting to cross the Atlantic together. But in our land of immigrants, we have to recognize that when immigrants contribute the best of what their original culture had to offer, Canada is automatically all the better for it. And that's what's been happening all these years. In reality, anyone with the courage to experience something new with the hope of finding something better, that's the immigrant spirit. Looking for something new, willing to get into something new despite the complications because you believe you can find something better. That's the spirit that motivates immigrants to do what they do. And Canada was founded on this spirit, and fueled by this spirit, Canada evolved into the nation that we can all celebrate today. And our future prospects continue to be influenced by this courageous spirit. Look at the look on that passport photo of that young family. Do you see a look of determination? And most of the photos shared from passports of arriving to Canada, they have that look. They have that serious determination. We're going to do this. And I'll never forget that. Down below, we have two sisters who married by proxy. Talk about courage. And then they would leave their home and go to Canada to join their husbands. Sometimes they didn't even know their husbands. Sometimes it was a family arrangement. Talk about courage. I couldn't do that. Wow. So for various reasons, and often under very difficult circumstances, many Italians have emigrated to Canada. And they've contributed greatly to the development of our nation. There you have the photo of the first time Italian construction workers marched in the Labor Day parade, 1960. Before that, we were afraid to be seen assembled together, etc. And a seamstress working in a Montreal garment factory, how many thousands did that? So living in Canada has contributed greatly to the evolution of an Italian-Canadian identity distinct from either Italian or Canadian cultures. We've developed over the years our own Italian-Canadian identity, and we should be proud of that. And this transformation project uses the Canadian-Italian experience to investigate these transformations, because as we came here to help transform Canada, living here helps to transform us. And that's why the title of this project and these books became Transformations, because it was that bilateral arrangement. Very important. And so the project was originally funded by a grant from the Government of Canada, from the Citizenship and Immigration Canada Interaction Program, to the National Congress of Italian Canadians Toronto District in the fall of 2012. That's when we received the funding, right towards the end of the year. And given the project's original focus on education, because the money was given to produce educational resources about the Italian experiences and the Italian accomplishments. Michael Tibolo, who had completed his term as president of the Toronto District, agreed to oversee the completion of this project because it was important to him. And he approached Angela Gauthier, who was at the time, director of the Toronto Catholic District School Board, and they worked together in partnership to see this project forward. And it is my honor that they're both here tonight, and I'm going to call them up one by one to say a few words. Now, first of all, Michael Tibolo, or today the Honorable Michael Tibolo, Associate Attorney General for the province of Ontario. He is instrumental not just in making sure that this project happened in the first place and was seen through to completion, but he's also instrumental in the recognition of June being Italian Heritage Month, first in the province and then across Canada. So Michael, come on up.
Buonasera, good evening everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here this evening and say a few words. I mean, for me, this project was inspirational from the standpoint of wanting to document for the purposes of teaching future generations who we as Italians are, what we as Italians contributed. And so it was really important because in 2010, with the entire legislature of the province of Ontario, we had the Italian Heritage Month in the month of June declared as that. For me, that was an important first step. And again, why? If legislation recognizes the contributions of the Italians to the building of the province, and in 2017, by the way, it expanded to Canada, what it does is it recognizes the contributions historically of the Italians to Canada. It gives us a reference point where we can look and remember the contributions that were made. Then it also gives us the opportunity to celebrate the people who continue living the culture and providing and promoting and doing everything possible to keep it alive in our communities. And we have so many organizations that do that each and every day, the Congress, CIBPA, Centro Scuola, the list goes on and on and on, but it gives us the opportunity to celebrate them as individuals who are continuing to give and keep those values alive in our communities. And the most important part is the fact that we're providing inspiration to the next generations. And why is that important? If we don't have strong foundations, if we don't have strong roots that basically give our children, our young people, the opportunity to remember what has happened in the past, to celebrate what we're doing today and providing mentorship to those generations, we lose that opportunity to keep alive our language, our culture, and our history. Now, a lot of people don't remember or know why June was picked, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what month we should pick for the Italian Heritage Month. And for me, the first most important day, or one of the most important days, is the day that Italy became a republic, June 2nd, 1940. And I thought it would be really good to include it because we do l'Alza Bandiera, whether Queen's Park, pretty much every municipality now, not just in Ontario, but across Canada. I thought that would be a good way to start. Then I thought to myself, June 10th, 1940. Some of you that are more history buffs will remember that that's the day, probably the one moment in our history in Canada that we should never forget. And the CIBPA, I see Bob Sacco sitting here tonight, did incredible work looking at what transpired. And you all remember Italy declared war against England, and under the Enemy Alien Act, all of us at that point, well, not us, I wasn't there to be part of that, but many people that have came before me ended up having to go and register and were carted off or bussed away to Petawawa and to other internment camps, and they lost everything. And we have many examples of that, not just in Ontario, but in Quebec as well. Those stories have to be told. They have to be remembered because it wasn't a cakewalk for the Italians to come to this country, and many of you have heard stories from your parents, maybe some of you experienced them as well. So it was an important day that we thought, you know what, we have to remember that. I noticed the poster before. I don't know who's responsible for it, but thank you, because St. Anthony, June 13th, important saint to all of us as Italians. So I saw that on the poster. I thought that's good because we've never included religion as part of, but that is a fundamental value. Spirituality is a fundamental value of who we are and our families. So I was glad to see that. Then, of course, the date that I think is the most incredible, I think Tony spoke about history and how we record history. The victors always record history, but Giovanni Caboto was not English. Giovanni Caboto was born in Gaeta. He lived in Venice, and he was given permission, not by Henry VII, but by the Pope, to come to try look to a new route to get to to China, to find a new route to China, and he ended up hitting North America and discovering it. So in 1497, June 24th, another important day we need to remember, and we need to, again, remind people that Giovanni Caboto, not John Cabot, is the person that discovered North America. So thinking of all those dates and thinking of that, we thought, June is the appropriate day. Now, I was only given an hour to speak, so I think I'm going to start. I'm going to try to conclude here, but I want to conclude with a story that my father's and mother's stories in one of the volumes. And I want to conclude with a story that I often reflect on. When my dad was a young man, when he came over and he brought a piece of a fig tree. And when I used to see him nurture this stupid plant and the time and energy he put into looking after it, I used to think to myself, like, once a farmer, always a farmer. And I thought, what? But I never stopped to think about the genetic material that he brought over from Canada, because what's the difference between that fig tree and its genetics and him coming to Canada and giving birth to a son, two sons and a daughter, actually, but to give birth to us? The fact of the matter is his blood was Italian. The fact of the matter is my blood's Italian, even though I was born here. Genetically, what's the difference between that plant and propagating the second one and nurturing it and keeping it going? The same way you nurture and keep going your spirit, your essence, who you are as a human being, your value systems. So every time I look at that stupid fig tree that now grows in my backyard, which is a propagated plant that I got from his fig tree, which produces bushels. Now, it's not just one, it's many, but they produce bushels of figs. I think to myself, that's what we all did as human beings. We came here, our parents came here, they gave birth to us. We have our families now, we're having kids as well and continuing that future. What's important is that genetic makeup has never changed. So what changes? What impacts on it? Environment. So if we continue to keep alive our language, if we continue to keep alive who we are, our heritage, our culture, the things we stand for, our value systems, they will be perpetuated in our children. And so this book, in a way, is fertilizer for that growth, for that continued nourishment that you need to get to the next stage. So with that, I'm going to stop, because I could talk forever on this topic and probably a few more, being a lawyer and a politician. But I want to say thank you to Angela, where are you? Oh, there she is, my sweetheart. When I went to see her, I remember the first conversations, because I received this check for $250,000, and they said to me, what do you plan to do with it? And I had 1 million people ask me, can I have a piece to do this and to do that? And I remember with Jason Kenney, I said to him, Jason, we need to do something more, at the time he was the minister, we're going to do something a little bit more permanent. And I thought, you know what? A curriculum that tells the story, that allows in social studies and in school to learn about the value systems. I think that's something that will not only serve the Italians or the Canadians of Italian origin that were here, but it also enrich other people in our communities and tell our story and allow people to compare it to their own stories. And when you look at some of the pictures here from the distance where I was sitting, any one of those pictures could have been my family. It could have been my uncle, it could have been my cousin, because at the end of the day, we all share that DNA. We all share our origins from a land that gave so much. And we live in a land that offers us so many opportunities. So let's keep them strong, not just during Italian Heritage Month, the month of June. Let's remember our value systems. Let's cherish our children. Spend the time necessary telling them the stories of their ancestors, reading them stories from these volumes, and continuing to build the legacy that we are so lucky to have as Canadians of Italian heritage. Grazie e buonasera.
Thank you so much, Michael. For me, he's still Michael because he's a friend. And now I'd like to call up Angela Goce. Well, Angela Di Nicolantonio Goce.
bring it down for the short people. Can you hear me? Is that good? I'll use my teacher voice. I probably won't even need it. Hi, everybody. There's so many spin-offs that I could take from what Michael said and what Angelo said and just go with those. It's phenomenal. The commonality for all of us in the story we're told. But first of all, I want to start with some gratitude. I want to thank Michael for choosing us, choosing the school board, and bringing this project to us, and for Angelo for accepting the challenge, because what we were is the incubator for what you see before you now. Those two editions did not start like that. We received the message, we were given the go-ahead, and then my job was to find the team. And when I asked around who would be best to lead this, everybody unanimously said Angelo Bellotta. He's the historian, he's already written books, he can bring it together. And when Angelo and I sat down for the first time, then we started looking at who are the teachers in our board who could contribute to this, and we sent out an all-call and we screened people, and battery's gone. Is this gone too? Oh, well. It's okay. And we screened people and we brought together a team, and it was wonderful. So that brings me to focus on teachers and what teachers bring to this project. But first of all, the fig tree. I have one of those fig trees too. Dad's been gone for about 14 years now, and we took a cutting of the fig tree and we tried to transplant it, and it kind of grew and then it died, and somebody said, no, keep it going because figs are very resilient, right? And sure enough, 2 years later, the fig tree came back and it's now in my backyard. So I bet you a lot of Italians have that experience. The fig tree, the strength of the fig tree represents our ancestry. Teachers, why teachers? What you see in those collections is the follow through that the original team of teachers put into this project, the love and the hard work that went into it. I bet you that if we were to do a survey, and here's a challenge for the Congress if we want another project, Toronto Catholic District School Board and Toronto Public District School Board have a large cohort of Italian Canadian teachers. It would be amazing to see how many of the teaching staff of the two largest school boards in Ontario have Italian Canadian teachers. And that's not for nothing. Teachers imbue love and passion and religion and spirituality in children. And that's our own immigrant contribution to our students. So not only did we live those stories that we told about in the original collection and in future collection, our teachers live those stories every day. Our teachers are responsible for drawing that out of their students. I came to Canada in 1959. I was an 8-year-old child. I learned English as a second language. I know the challenges that immigrant children have in learning a new language. Teachers are responsible for modeling. I was in heaven when I started high school in Madonna, and my French teacher was an Italian woman. And all I could think of was, oh my God, if she can do that, then I can do that. So it inspires people to get to where they are. And if you really think about it, when a parent was told that their child was going to be a teacher, they made it. Their sacrifices have paid off. Teaching was an entryway into an acceptable movement upward. We've done well. We've got lots of lawyers, we've got lots of doctors, we've got judges. But you know what? Parents were always thrilled to have a teacher in their family. So I just want to say that this project is important in and as of itself, but it's also important because the beginnings of it, the genesis of it, was with teachers who told their stories, and hopefully students will be inspired by that. And we can't forget that teachers brought it to life. A teacher really keeps it going. Thank you, Angelo.
So with the focus on education, I was brought in to look after the project, but it wasn't just me. A team of experienced teachers joined me in the summer of 2013, and they were all the children and grandchildren of Italian immigrants, and they brought that experience with them as we began to build this thing together. Rosaria Dugo, Luisa Fracassi, Mark Mora, Sandra Mustacato, and Valerie Sacchetti. They joined me from the beginning when we weren't sure exactly what we were supposed to do, to start putting our thoughts together to produce this, what they used to call curriculum, but it's not really curriculum. It's a support document for teachers that will help bring this conversation into the classroom more often. And so what we did is we put together all of our work for that first summer into a validation draft, because we needed the feedback from our colleagues. Are we going in the right direction? Does this make as much sense to you as it does to us? And so we did that. And the first people to receive a copy of this validation draft were Prime Ministers Stephen Harper of Canada and Enrico Letta of Italy in September of 2013. The project website was then launched the following year after we got this feedback and were able to make the suggested additions, improvements, and some of the feedback we got caused us to rethink what we were talking about, but no one said blow it up and start over again. Everybody said, no, this is good. This is long overdue. How about this? How about this? And so it gave us lots of food for thought, and we were able to move the project forward nicely. So that when the 2015, 2016, we kept growing the collection of stories. When the funds ran out, the Congress assumed all the costs of completing the project, of moving it forward to where it needed to be. And I stayed on. I've been working for many years pro bono because this project was far too important for me. Yeah, we had, by the time that the project funds ran out, the government funds ran out, we had 56 stories in the collection. Well, to me, that just simply wasn't enough. And so we continued to work at it. And what was motivating, what was in the back of my mind, and some folks have already suggested this. Look at these two pictures that I love putting them side by side. The black and white is Camp Petawawa, 1941. You can see 3 guards watching as prisoners are marched down the road. Some of those prisoners were Italians. And the only crime they had committed was being Italian. Now, let's fast forward to the color photograph, 2015. That's the Coro San Marco performing in the Timothy Eaton Church on Remembrance Day in 2015. An Italian choir, primarily Italian choir, in an Anglo-Saxon Protestant church on Remembrance Day. To me, that shows how far we've come in all this time. And these are 2 photos taken from 2 different narratives in the collection. All of these stories are available on the website, as some of you already know. The website, www.transformationscanada.com. And there are 204 narratives on the website. There are 26 classroom-ready learning activities for teachers to bring these stories into the classroom. And there are additional resources and additional research tools for students doing research projects. Now, I wanted to go back to these. The first 2 photos are from the Di Gregorio family up in Thunder Bay. the nonno and nonna, and then the grandkids working together to harvest the family's tomato crop. This final photo on the right is my family on Tomato Day, 3 generations of my family working on making tomato for the tomato sauce for the whole year's pasta. And again, the tomato for us as Italians, just like the fig tree, has become an icon. It's part of our culture, it's part of who we are. And so the project goals, just to summarize, this project was to develop a fuller understanding and appreciation of the immigrant experience, to recognize diverse contributions of Italian immigrants, because we contributed in many fields, to celebrate the immigrant spirit, to provide insight into human nature and our human condition, which transcends culture, and providing sound curriculum support for teachers and classrooms. That's what we were trying to accomplish, and I believe we have. The themes that come through in these stories, and it's not like we sat these people down and explained to them what they needed to talk about. These are the themes that emerged on their own. Facing hardship, everybody talked about that. Life steeped in family, centered on family. Building community, wanting to contribute to Canada, and dealing with discrimination. Many people talked about that. And adapting and making sacrifices, earning respect. It was something we had to earn, wasn't given to us. Working with pride and passion. These stories, if they reveal nothing else, that's what they reveal. What we did with passion. And we were driven to succeed. And, okay. Never let a machine know you need them. Because they're slowly taking over the world, and the only way they can do that is to drive us crazy. So I don't know what just happened. There was a problem, and Microsoft was closed. Okay. All right, so let's see. Now, let's try this then again. And we'll try and fast forward to it. Wow. Yeah. This would be a good time for the guitar, Franco. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Let's see. If we go to... Okay. Oh, okay. I'll have to remember St. Francis later. Yes. There's nothing more extraordinary than the experiences of ordinary Italian immigrants facing their everyday challenges. And this extraordinary power also comes from their courageous drive to succeed at all costs. Failure was just simply not an option. When you arrive here with maybe $20 in your pocket, you can't go back. Economically, you can't afford to go back. Even socially, you can't afford to go back. You'd be the laughingstock of your village, your community. È arrivato l'americano. So we came by the tens of thousands, and we built new lives for ourselves and our families. And it was clear that the sacrifices of our parents we're not so much for them. They were doing it for us, so we would have a better life with better opportunities than they ever had. So as we move forward, then there were 56 narratives when the funding ran out, with 24 classroom-ready activities, and the community kept asking, we want a book, we want a book, we want a book, we want a book. The website just wasn't enough for them. And so what did we do? Well, first of all, thank God, in 2022, Dr. Gina Valle joined to also work pro bono with me as the associate editor for Volume 2. How good was she? Volume 2 was completed by 2025. Took 4 years. Took 8 years to do Volume 1. I rest my case. And so it was very important that we complete the task, and Gina stepped up, and I'm grateful, so that we could move forward, because another Italian motto is sempre avanti. We got to find a way. So, as we move forward, a fundraising campaign was launched during the Ordine al Merito Gala, November the 8th, 2024, to subsidize the publication of these books that the community wanted. We wanted to help keep the selling price affordable, and we wanted to print both volumes at the same time. The Canadian publishing industry is in a very precarious condition. They don't publish 2 volumes at the same time. They publish one, they see how it goes, and then they decide whether they're going to publish Volume 2 or not. But we wanted them both published, because if only one got published, you can imagine the conversations in our community. And so during that event, Michael Tibollo was the first to pledge money that same evening. And following his example, so many community members, and some are here with us tonight, and I thank them for stepping forward and allowing us to raise the funds needed so that we can move forward together as a community. I could go through and read them all, but thank you so much to the people who saw the value in this project and said, we must do these books. And so let's share now some of the stories. I'm going to call up Dr. Gina Valle, and even though we're slightly behind because of some of these complications, Gina, I met her back about 11 years ago when she stepped forward to volunteer to write her family's story. She called it Breaking New Ground. And what struck me about it was that she focused her thoughts on what it was like having to live in 2 different worlds simultaneously. The world of her Calabrese Italian parents at home, and then of course the world outside the home in Canada. And with all due respect to her Italian roots and her Italian family and her Italian world, she had to find her own way in our Canada. And so going to university and getting her PhD, and she also started Diversity Matters, which focused on welcoming and encouraging the interaction of various diverse peoples in working together to build something valuable together. And so Dr. Gina has been instrumental in writing, in editing, in leading community, and in building bridges and connections. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Gina Valle to come and talk about her family story.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Children of immigrants learn to live in two worlds. As a first-generation Canadian, I learned to modify my Italian culture in order to make it workable in Canadian society. I think of many children of immigrants who share this feeling and this way of living. As a woman raised in the immigrant home, I traveled daily between the rural, southern Italian culture I lived inside my home and the urban, mainstream Canadian culture I lived outside my home. Each day I tried to build these bridges of understanding as I create a new culture, a fusion of both. This new culture, this fusion, straddles the old world that I was raised in and the new world of urban Canadian society. Despite how difficult it was to live this dual life, there's no doubt that this reality allowed me to have a more full life. Sometimes neurotic, but mostly full. Living with these identities has made me a more flexible, a more open-minded, and a more resourceful person. My parents were post-war immigrants to Canada from Calabria. My father, Domenico Valle, arrived at Pier 21 in 1957. My mother, Giuseppa Ziccarelli, came in 1960. My parents had been neighbors in their hometown. My father was the eldest of his family, and shortly after his father died, he went to France, Germany, and eventually in Canada to search for steady work. While in Toronto, my father held down 3 jobs and lived with his cousins until he decided it was time to get married. He wrote his neighbor in his hometown and asked to marry his eldest daughter. A few months later, in 1960, my mother boarded a ship in Napoli bound for Canada. 2 years later, I was born. 3 years after that, my brother was born. In the early years, my father made donuts, washed cars, and sold vacuum cleaners. My mother made clothes for dolls and took care of boarders to help support the family. As my parents worked around the clock, my nonna, Luigina Valle, cared for us in our home. Nonna had come to Canada to live with her eldest son shortly before my baptism. I attended public schools, and in keeping with my parents' strong work ethic, I began working as of 11 years old, delivering newspapers, babysitting, stocking shelves at the local drugstore. From time to time, I would adopt a Hollywood version of life, but otherwise, I instinctively knew that everything in life would require a heck of a lot of hard work. Creating a new culture, one that straddles the old world that my parents understand and the new world of Canadian society, has always been a very complex process for me. As a daughter of immigrants, I tried to reconcile the irreconcilable, my private and public worlds. This is how it worked. Outside of the family home, my public persona was very Canadian, very mainstream, very independent. Inside the home, my entire focus was the extended family and traditional values. I had accepted this dual life because it was the only way I knew how to get through each day without disappointing my parents. I was the same person in each situation, but my response changed according to the circumstances. Somehow, I had figured out a way to negotiate in and out of the Italian immigrant home and the Canadian lifestyle. It worked, and as any kid of immigrants will tell you, these negotiation skills continue to work for us as we try to understand the cultural values, the religious beliefs, gender limitations, and professional expectations inside our home and outside of our home. Over time, as I learned to accommodate the Canadian culture, I quietly abandoned my Italian culture. I believe that this is the reality for many first-generation Canadians as we struggle to merge these two identities. Immigrants in a new homeland really only know one way of viewing the world. Children of immigrants always know two. As a teen, I told half-truths and half-lies to get by, like when I wanted to attend the school dance, go to a sleepover, date a boy, wear makeup, wear my skirt above the knee, or travel outside of Toronto for school trips. As I raise my kids, care for my mother, have a professional life, the tensions of navigating these two systems are still a part of me today. Ever since I was a child, I made every attempt to be recognized as an impeccable member of Canadian society, which inevitably consisted of closing off my private life when I closed the door behind me and went to school. I became resourceful as I adjusted to the expectations of Canadian culture. I had to become creative to cope with realities like, why was there no summer camp when people would ask me at school? But rather, my summer camp was nonna. When classmates left for the cottage, my excursions were limited to the park down the street. I attended university in Toronto rather than moving out of the city and living in residence. As a woman raised in a traditional culture, I was primarily expected to wed and embrace motherhood. The added accomplishment of higher education and a profession were niceties. Once again, I was caught between my heritage culture's expectations and my own needs and aspirations as a woman. In the same year I was accepted to do my doctoral work, I also became a wife. Guess which garnered more celebration? Both were beautiful events, but guess which event? As such, I've lived in a sea of crushing pressure to conform and limit my expectations to that of marriage and of motherhood. Although I am deeply connected to my heritage culture, I quietly chose to rebel against the same culture that has not always valued our contribution as women. Eventually, I opted to walk away from the script that others had written for me. Let's face it, not many of our accomplishments as women were worthy of discussion around the kitchen table in our homes. According to my Southern Italian culture, success as a real woman is measured by how well we tend to the hearth, and rarely in professional terms. In the home, I clear away the table and make coffee for my uncles. Outside of the home, I challenge people's biases and teach immigrant women about their rights. At times, these competing images of womanhood is a bit difficult to shoulder. Having grown up feeling that few choices were available to me outside of the traditional female lifestyle, my professional work turned to creating a space for women to consider a space for women to consider that they have more choices. As kids of immigrants, we've had to resort to resentful compromises, distorted lies, contradictory behavior. For our parents, Canadian society was too laissez-faire for their liking. Most of the time, everyone around them spoke a language that was incomprehensible. Us, their children, feel that we were entitled to question rispetto, to question onore, mamma, papa, I paesani, and even God sometimes. Sometimes the tangible drudgery of their second-class work seemed more tolerable for our parents than the struggles they faced raising their children in a new country. In 1994, I married and moved to Montreal, where my husband worked. We lived there for several years. Our first son was born on a blistery cold January day. It seemed that it would take forever before I would love being a mother. But as routine set in and our son smiled and made us laugh, I fell in love with him and with my new role as a mother. My heart has been full ever since. Within a matter of a few years, we were back in Toronto and in the family hearth. After the defense of my doctoral thesis, which was at the same time that I was carrying our second child, my nonna fell ill and it was time to complete the circle of care that she had started when she arrived in time for my baptism. With 2 children in diapers, my nonna bedridden due to a stroke, my husband traveling internationally more than ever, my professional goals needed to be put on hold. They were for a while, until we settled into a routine in our own home. With the kids in school, I turned my efforts to working in the field of diversity. I launched Diversity Matters and went on to do a number of creative projects, books, and documentaries. And life seemed manageable and as decent as it should be until the sudden illness of my father. At the age of 74, he was diagnosed with cancer. Dad was the eldest in his family, the caregiver, the nurturer, the relentless worker who loved his homemade salami, his trips to Florida, his bocce games, lunch at the Mandarin, and above all else, his family. He died within a matter of weeks, and everything I knew to be true and real was shattered. I grieved longingly for the person who had been such an inspiration in my life and an exceptional role model for my sons. He left us too soon. With my father gone, I became my mother's right-hand person. Instead of having quiet dinners at home with my family, I chose to participate in a host of Italian-Canadian initiatives, from documenting the stories of Italian immigrant women for the Multicultural History Society of Ontario, the Italian Canadians as Enemy Aliens National Project, as a board member here at Villa Charities and chair of culture, the Association of Italian Canadian Writers, or being a voice for our community on the Omni TV Advisory Council as it's restructured its programming for ethnocultural communities across the country. With my mother being a widow, I am her principal caregiver and perhaps her best friend. I help my kids with homework, I prepare dinner, I carpool to soccer practices, I sit with my mother at her doctor and dentist appointments, and attend meetings in our Italian-Canadian community, or Lifeline Syria, or Multi-Faith Toronto, or the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. My life is one of fusion, of 2 cultures in one life. This fusion I speak of, I do it for my parents, and I do it for my children. I do it for Domenico and Giuseppa Valle, as it is a small way of honoring my parents' love and commitment to us and to this country. I also do it for my sons, Gabriele and Alessandro, as it is my way of teaching them about the past, about Nonno and Nonna's past, and about my past, and to give them a strong sense of belonging to a place we all call home. Thank you.
See what I mean about powerful stories? And we can all relate to different aspects of everyone's story. That's what brings us together as well. So now, I'm going to invite Lisa Malcolm to come up. Lisa comes from she's a second generation career educator, so she comes from a family of teachers for the Toronto Catholic District School Board. And she's going to be telling us about her experiences in researching and co-writing her family's narrative. Now, the Bondi family narrative goes back to pre-World War I. And that's why I was so excited to get Lisa to come up, because this was a different time period in Canada, and yet some of the experiences, some of the events that happened in her family are quite similar to what we experienced when we came after the Second World War. So Lisa, come on up and tell us a bit about your family's experience. Because in fact, as the children of immigrants, we're all products of bravery. Absolutely.
Thank you, Angelo.
Oh,
Or can we just maybe just move it there? We can move it down.
we can do that, yeah.
I think it'll work if we move it down.
Next time, we'll only allow tall people to speak. Won't be a problem. Yeah, grab that chair. That's a good idea. We'll put the chair here. I'll be out of your way in just a second. Good idea. Let's go around.
Thank you, Angelo. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Malcolm, and I'm honored to be here today representing my mother, Pauline Halferty, and my aunt, Marianne Williams, and our entire family as I share a reflection on the lives and legacy of my great-grandparents, Luigi and Candida Bondi, and the Bondi and Cardone families. At the turn of the century, millions of Italian immigrants left their homes and families behind in search of opportunity, hope, and a better future. Many arrived through Ellis Island with little more than the clothes on their back, a small suitcase, and dreams of building a new life for future generations. They faced enormous challenges, long and dangerous voyages, unfamiliar languages, hard labor, poverty, and uncertainty. Yet they carried with them courage, determination, and faith, and a deep love of family. Among these immigrants were my great-grandparents, Luigi Bondi and Candida Sanseri Bondi of Trebia, Sicily. Luigi was born in 1877 and grew up working on his family's farm near Trebia alongside his father and brothers. The family cultivated olives and citrus fruits, and from a very young age, Luigi understood the value of hard work and perseverance. Like many young Italians of his generation, he dreamed of greater opportunities abroad. In 1894, at only 17 years of age, Luigi immigrated to the United States, joining his brother Sam in Niagara Falls, New York. For several years, he worked difficult jobs, construction sites, railroads, bridges, and homes, even before eventually returning to Sicily. And then in 1903, Luigi proposed to a young woman from Trebia named Candida Sanseri. Candida was born in 1889 and had already experienced hardship early in her life. She lost her father when she was only 4 years old. Despite the uncertainty of the future, Luigi and Candida were married on April 4th, 1904, beginning a partnership that would last an extraordinary 75 years. Soon after their marriage, Luigi believed that there were greater opportunities for them in North America. And then in 1905, Luigi and Candida boarded a crowded ship bound for the United States. Their journey across the Atlantic was far from easy. During a transfer in Naples, they lost much of their food and personal belongings, including Candida's trousseau. Like many immigrants of that era, they endured difficult conditions during the voyage. Yet even in hardship, they continued forward with hope and determination. After establishing himself once again in the United States, Luigi eventually moved his young family to Canada in 1910, first to Newmarket, Ontario, and then later that same year to Mount Forest, Ontario. Canada had been described to them as the land of wealth and opportunity, and they arrived in Mount Forest with little more than ambition, faith, and a willingness to work hard. In Mount Forest, Luigi and Candida began building what would become the L. Bondi wholesale and retail fruit business on Main Street. Starting with a small operation, they slowly expanded through tireless work and with the support of kindness of the many people in the community. In 1913, he purchased his first truck in Mount Forest, Ontario, and I believe the photograph on the right side of the of the screen is that first truck. And he bought this to expand far beyond the limits of horse and wagon transportation. Over time, the business grew to serve communities across the region, stretching as far as Owen Sound and Tobermory. Candida was remarkable in every sense of the word. Though she had had limited formal education, she possessed incredible intelligence, determination, and business ability. While raising a large family, she also managed the retail store and helped oversee wholesale operations. She taught herself English alongside her children and became known for her strong business instincts and resourcefulness. Luigi, despite not being able to read or write, was widely respected as an exceptional businessman whose honesty, work ethic, and kindness earned admiration throughout the community. Life was not without hardship. The family endured the loss of 4 children in infancy. They lived through the Great Depression and faced enormous challenges during the Second World War, when restrictions on imported goods made running the business extremely difficult. In 1944, a devastating fire destroyed their warehouse, their trucks, and valuable produce. Yet once again, the family persevered, and through resilience, faith, and support from the Mount Forest community, they rebuilt and they continued forward. Their story is not just one of a business success, but also one of family, and music, and faith, and love. The Bondi home was always filled with music. Luigi loved to sing while gardening or working, and family members gathered around the piano for sing-alongs that became treasured memories for generations. Their home became a place of warmth, laughter, storytelling, and togetherness. Luigi and Candida were deeply devoted to their faith, and they were active members of St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church. They believed their success and longevity came from God's grace, strong family bonds, and simple living, and an unwavering support for one another. Remarkably, they celebrated 75 years of marriage before both passing away in 1979. Luigi, he was 102, and Candida was 90. Interestingly, although Luigi and Candida carried Sicily in their hearts throughout their lives, they never returned to their homeland after immigrating to North America. Like many immigrants of their generation, they made that difficult sacrifice of leaving behind not only their country, but also their family members, traditions, and familiar surroundings in order to create new opportunities for their children and future generations. And just as a note, another important part of our family story began in 1932, when a young Italian immigrant named Gennaro James Cardone arrived in North America from Santa Maria di Castellabate in Salerno. This was my beloved grandfather. At only 15 years old, he traveled alone, carrying a ticket pinned to his shirt, identifying his destination in Canada. Unable to understand English, he accidentally ended up on a train to Mount Forest, Ontario, rather than Galt, Ontario. He would later say he was destined to come to Mount Forest. And it was there that James eventually worked for Luigi Bondi and in the fruit business, where he met Luigi and Candida's daughter, Clara Bondi. James and Clara were married in 1942, continuing the strong Bondi family legacy in Mount Forest. Together, they built a loving home and raised a family deeply connected to the values of hard work, kindness, resilience, and community service that had been passed down through generations. As descendants of Luigi and Candida Bondi and James and Clara Cardone, we are incredibly proud of the sacrifices our ancestors made. Their courage created opportunities for future generations that they themselves could scarcely have imagined. Their story reflects the experiences of so many Italian immigrant families who left everything familiar behind them to create new lives in Canada and North America. I feel very fortunate to have known my great-grandparents, as not many people have the opportunity to spend any time with theirs. I have fond memories of visiting them and often exploring my great-grandfather's beautiful garden while he shared his love of gardening with me. I also remember the gentle nature of my great-grandmother as she began telling stories of her life in Italy. She would often slip into Italian, which at the time I was too young to understand. Although I was only 8 years old when they passed away, the memories I have of their warmth, kindness, and love remain with me today. Today I look at my boys, Nicholas and David, and I am reminded that their futures were made possible by these brave individuals who crossed oceans with hope in their hearts and faith in a better tomorrow. We are deeply grateful for the opportunity to share our family history and preserve these memories for future generations. We thank you, Angelo Bellata, for leading this meaningful project and for inviting us to be part of this beautiful book and lasting legacy. Your dedication to preserving Italian-Canadian history ensures that the stories, the struggles, and contributions of immigrant families like ours will never be forgotten. The Bondi and Cardone story is ultimately a story of courage, faith, family, perseverance, and gratitude, values that continue to guide our family today. Canada became their home, and because of their sacrifices, we continue to honor their legacy with pride and appreciation. Thank you.
I'm going to use my teacher voice and speak from down here. This up and down is way too much work. Gianni Mignardi is I have to go up there? Oh, the boss has to. Let's try that again. Our next speaker, Gianni Mignardi, for the last 39 years has been working City of Toronto Building Division. And I've asked him to speak with us a little bit this evening and tell us about his story, because what impressed me most when he first told it to me was the fact that we can see the struggles and the hardships, and what had to be overcome and what had to be endured as immigrants. His story is complicated by the fact that he was twice an immigrant, not just once. So, Johnny, come on up and tell us about that.
Yes, and my father had a fig tree too, but he didn't put insulation around it in the winter. He actually put a vent from the furnace that went outside in a greenhouse. Allora, grazie, buonasera a tutti. Voglio ringraziare innanzitutto Angelo, il congresso, Michael Tibollo, Tony Poletta, Gina, who I just recognized now, and Angela per una serata bellissima. Un bel applauso a loro, forza. My story, I never really, yes, I did suffer, but I've heard a lot of other stories of people that truly suffered when they came to this country and immigrated anywhere else, really. You know, they came from probably nothing to hoping to come to a land of milk and honey, but they had to produce their own milk and honey after a while. But when I met Angelo, I do a lot of work here at the Columbus Center at Verbula Charities. When I met Angelo, he asked me what, you know, he found out more or less about my story, and he found it very interesting, and he wanted me to you know, contribute to the book. And you know, for me it was a little bit difficult because I've always I've always respected all our grandparents and parents that came here with nothing. And my story was a bit different. I was born in Canada. My dad was Trociaro. My mother was a Molizana. My dad was a construction worker. He worked part-time selling varikina and with the truck. Yeah, and my mother worked in a bakery, a Jewish bakery, right on Eglinton and Bathurst for a while, and then she started cleaning homes. And you know, I've had a lot of mentors in my life that have guided me through my life experiences, and one of them is here tonight. My grade 7 teacher, Mr. Nicholson. I'll let you know about Mr. Nicholson later on. I lived more or less a normal life in Canada from an immigrant family. My parents weren't as old-fashioned as a lot of other people were. You know, both my parents spoke very good English because my dad had the business. My mother worked cleaning homes and in Jewish families, and she learned English very quick. She enjoyed, her work. My dad was cool. He drove a 1968 GTO, so you can't get any cooler than that. And you know, I was born around the Dufferin and St. Clair area. We moved to Dufferin and Wilson later on, which was then, you know, Downsview was the new Little Italy at the time, you know, in the 60s, 70s, before people moved to Woodbridge, of course. And we lived in Downsview, and we thought we were cool because we lived right next to Yorkdale, which was very popular at the time. I went to St. Norbert's Catholic School in Dufferin and Wilson. A lot of you know where that is. And St. Norbert's opened in 1965. And back then, we were basically 95% Italians. And a lot of us were born, a lot of them weren't even born in Italy that came to school there. And it was very hard for us, like other people were saying, you had two lives. One is your home, the other one is outside. And that's what we found, you know. And we inside, we were mainly Italian, speaking Italian with our parents. And then outside, we had this other world. And this other world was very difficult for us. You know, we had to relate, we had to everything, you know, at the time. And there were many, we had only one Italian teacher in our school, and we had Mr. Nicholson. Now, Mr. Nicholson was the only teacher who would relate to us. He would understand what we were going through. You know, times were really tough for us as a kid. We tried to be cool, we tried to be Canadian, we didn't know what we were. And Mr. Nicholson was the only one that came across to us and understood us. He was my grade 7 teacher, and then he became our grade 8 teacher, but I left in grade 8. And then later on, we're talking 30 years later, we found out that Mr. Nicholson's mother, who's now 98 years old, was Pugliese from Monteleone. And I figure that this is why he understood our background and what we were going through. Now, so I was born here, went through the normal life, this and that. Then at 13 years old, my father decided to pack it in and go to Italy, just out of the blue. My mother was devastated. She had her whole family here, mother, father, and all relatives, brothers. But he decided to pack it in against all our wishes, and we moved. You know, Columbus discovered America in October 12, 1492. We discovered Italy October 12, 1972. Now, it was a big move. I remember Mr. Nicholson had a little go-away party for us. That was the first month of grade 8. And everything was very touching. Now, we moved there. Now, figure you're moving from Downsview, a pretty well-developed area, you know, the Woodbridge of the 60s and 70s, to a farm out of nowhere, a farm in Trugeria. No phone, of course, no radio. We didn't have a radio. TV, we barely bought a TV, a little black and white TV, you know, 2 channels back then that were on about 6 hours a day. no heat. Electricity was a luxury. You know, electricity, when you turn on the light, you put a 40-watt bulb in there. And when you turn on the light at night, and when everyone turns on the TV, the bulb goes down to about 20 watts.
One or the other.
I'm serious. I had to study with a candle. I would study with a candle next to me. You know, and I do a lot of studying back then because I went through a devastating thing at school. We would sleep, you know, a lot of you have done this when they lived in it. We would sleep with our hats on, wool socks, heavy sweaters, and you'd be trembling at night when you're sleeping. Anyway, it wasn't a third world country, but big difference from down to. My greatest downfall though was, see, I was a grade 8 student here at St. Norbert's. I was in grade 8, and all I knew when I went to Italy was qualche parola in dialetto sciuciaro o l'italiese. Andiamo a stare a Lugano, e metto il gas a Lugano, la bega, più lo store, that's what I knew. When I went to Italy, it was a devastation because they put me from grade 8 to grade 6. And I was already 13, I was already developed, all my classmates were this high, they thought I was a teacher. And it was really the worst thing in my life. You know, you're 13, you're already developing, you're becoming an adult and everything. There's a lot of changes going on in your life, and this hits you. And it was very hard for me. You know, going from learning history from the book Fair Domain in grade 7, you know, you're just learning American and Canadian history. Now you go there, you're learning Italian history, Roman history that you don't know anything about, Italian literature, grammar, Latin, history, of course. We had to memorize one poem per day. And you know, in Italy, they check, you go there, you have to go up and read the poem from the teacher. I couldn't do that. And l'Iliade, we said l'Iliade, l'Odissea, it was just, I was being hassled, I was being bullied, I was being discriminated as l'americano. And it was hard for me. My dad didn't want to hear about it. He didn't want to hear anything about it. It was pretty tough on that. And you know, I had schoolwork, I had farm work. When I got home, I had to help out. I remember every day I got home, I would chop some wood for the night fire. My grandfather would be watching me, see how I chopped it. It was really tough. I mean, I couldn't hang out with the people that I knew around the neighborhood because they all smoked and drank. They went to the bar and played cards all day and all night. And I didn't do that. And my dad knew that I couldn't really, team up with them. At school, it was a bit different. At school, we had a lot of higher educated people at school. I was the only farmer in the class. I was the only one that lived in the farm. Everyone else lived in the city. So already there was a problem. It was really tough for me. Then I finally got my grades and I went to Liceo Scientifico. Liceo Scientifico is like an advanced high school. My dad was very upset when he found out that I was in Liceo Scientifico because he thought that he didn't know that that's like a preparation to go to university. He made it very clear to me that he could not afford to send me to university. He wanted me to become a welder because welding was really big at the time, was popular. But you know, I like to be highly educated. I wanted to become an architect. And he made it very clear to me that he was not sending me to high school. So that was another, thing in my life. But in the 70s in Italy was really bad. I don't know if you understand. They were going through a recession. The government was collapsing every year. There was cholera in Napoli. There was Brigata Rosse, corruption. Let's not even talk about corruption from north to south. And I was really going through a major depression at the time. I tried to keep up my English in many ways. I finally got a radio, and on a shortwave radio, I got a station called AFN, American Forces Network, that transmitted out of Germany. And they transmitted all the games, football games, hockey games. And music, I would get up 1 o'clock in the morning to listen to the American Top 40 Billboard. I would listen from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning. My dad didn't know anything. If he knew, he would have killed me. And I would listen to each song and write each song down. Then I got smarter, I taped it. I taped it so I could listen throughout the week. Just to maintain my culture. Then I had friends always writing me from, you know, back then a letter would take a week, from a week to 3 weeks to get here. You write letter, you write back, so you look about 2 months for communication, you know. It was really bad. I had Mr. Nicholson write to me many times, that my friends write to me many times. And I had, for example, I had Time magazine. I would get Time magazine, the European edition. I would read it from front to back with the Canadian dictionary, with an English dictionary next to me. I would read everything, all for every single page, and read to myself, sotto voce, read to myself to keep my pronunciation and everything. That's things that I had to do. Anyway, my dad did not want me to come back. I already lost 2 years in school. And then I found out that I thought being a Canadian citizen, I didn't have to do the military. But I found out that I was a resident. As long as you're a resident in Italy and your parents are Italian, you do the military. Military was 2 years back then, 2 years. And this really upset me. And then I found out through school, because like the school di Gio Scientifico, tutti i figli di papà, okay, figli di dottori, figli di eccetera, they would pay, and I'm saying this loudly, they would get out of military service by paying the maresciallo or whatever, 500.000 lire, to have their kid get out of military service. I found this out and I freaked. I freaked on my father. I said, look, this is bullshit, excuse the French. This is bullshit. I lost 2 years of school. I lost 2 years doing military service. That's 4 years. I'm out of here. And I was 18 at the time. And when I said that, my dad just looked at me and put his head down. He didn't say a word. So I made plans to come back. It was, you know, that's how this double immigrant comes in. I came back after 5 years staying in Italy. I found, you know, I came back, of course. It was tough. The first 2 years, I was literally counting nickels and dimes. I almost ended up living on the street. I slept in bus shelters because I didn't have a car. I started driving when I was 24. And I worked in a restaurant, and the restaurant, you know, closed at, you know, get out of the restaurant 2 or 3 in the morning. If you miss the bus, you have to wait for the first bus to come at 5 or 6 in the morning. So I would sleep in the bus shelter. I slept many times in apartment buildings in the winter, in the lobby. And you know, people were kicking at me as they're walking out. They think I'm a street person. Just to wait for the bus to actually kick me to wake me up, which was good. And that was my life for almost a couple of years. I couldn't afford to go to university, of course. I did all this without any support from Italy because my parents had nothing. They were counting nickels and dimes themselves. So I finally made it through to Humber. I studied architecture at Humber. But at Humber, it was tough for me because I was going to college, but I still had to work. So I ended up working 40 hours a week while I was in Humber at the restaurant. I would work Thursday nights, Friday nights, Saturday nights. Then I would sleep over the restaurant, because I had no car, sleep over to open on Sunday mornings and work from 9 till 12 on Sunday. That was my 40-hour week, and then I would rush to school on Monday. Things were really tough. I couldn't hang out with my former friends from Downsview because this is the 70s. The 70s was all disco. Disco, you went out with your three-piece suit, your Camaro, your Firebird. I was still on a bus. Fortunately, they understood. They understood what I was going through. Was that 4 or 5 minutes or 45 minutes?
That's 50 minutes.
Anyway, they understood. Thankfully, they understood what I was going through. And you know, it was after the couple of years I finally put myself on my feet, but this took perseverance, being grounded. I had to really be grounded and not lose my control. And of course, my faith helped me along with that, and I made it through. You know, I made it through. Right now, I do a lot of volunteer work here at Columbus Center at Village Charities, where I met Angelo. I do a lot of other volunteer work, Lazio Federation, the Verdi Cultural Society, which is my village where I came from. And things worked out, thank goodness. I have a beautiful wife, as you can see, and 2 kids. That was me in Downsview there on the horse. And the middle picture was, actually that's when I just came back from a visit. I visited Canada in 1974. And that's where I got the jacket and the pants. And that was right outside our house. If I can just read a paragraph out of my narrative here, just to finish off. My life journey has given me the capacity to look at life from a bird's eye view, and has offered me the opportunity to experience the cultural aspects of not only Italy and Canada, but also the influence I have had on history, language, and music, etc. I have learned to use this knowledge to help me diversify my outlook and enrich the different stages of my personal life and career. Overall, I enjoy being active culturally, and I am truly interested in listening to many stories of immigrants from diverse backgrounds. I have found that all immigrants have had their own ventures and experiences. Some may have been negative, while others were positive. In my case, being a double immigrant proved to be a difficult but ultimately rewarding challenge. I like to think that some of the insight gained through my double experience has helped me to become a better person. The experience has left me eager to acknowledge and celebrate my own cultural heritage. It has also made me more respectful of cultural diversity and the importance of mutual respect. Hopefully, some of this insight has also been passed to my family. Thank you very much.
And our final guest speaker this evening is Vanessa Sacco. Vanessa is a Toronto-based program coordinator, manager, and the events planner. And she is so happy with all the time she is able to spend with her grandparents in Welland, Ontario. So Vanessa, why don't you come back and share your story with us and listen to the metaphors and her use of symbolism and the power of storytelling, ladies and gentlemen. Vanessa Sacco.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay, and I know we're all Italian and we have what I like to say ants in our pants. So if you need to wiggle or move around, we've been sitting down for a while, so by all means do that, that's fine. Okay, so good evening. Thank you, Angelo. My name is Vanessa Sacco and thank you for having me here today. Dovetailing from the Honorable Michael Tobolo's story, I have to say honorable because I don't know him well enough to call him by his first name. I'm a product of the propagating. I am a second generation fig tree, shall we say. So when people talk about how they grew up, they often mention neighborhoods, schools, and bedrooms. When I think about my childhood, I think about smells. That cucumber pulled straight from the garden, the brushing off dirt before devouring it, the cold cantina where the demijohns of homemade wine rested, tomato sauce simmering, and garlic so strong, you know the kind that you smell it on everyone. It's lingering on the breath, on the clothes, it's coming out of your pores. I think about sounds, Italian folk songs, loud, booming Italian voices, and a house that always felt full. For a long time, I didn't think much about it. It was just home. So tonight, I want to share a bit about where I come from, why I wrote Living in a 1950s Italian Time Capsule, and what the process of writing it has helped me understand, not just about my family, but about identity, memory, and the stories that we carry with us. I grew up between cultures. I'm Italian on one side and French Canadian on the other. I was born in Toronto, and technically, I have a larger extended family on my French Canadian side. But whenever someone asked me what my background was, I never hesitated. I always said Italian first. I didn't have a reason for that at the time. It was just something I felt, not something I had a language for yet. And this feeling eventually became the starting point of why I wrote this piece. So this is just a little excerpt. Growing up, whenever someone asked me what my background was, I always said Italian, French Canadian. While I was born in Toronto and have a bigger family on my French Canadian side, I still always said Italian first. This was not something I was prompted into saying, but something I felt. Maybe it was my brown eyes and dark curly hair, the ability to tan easily, my booming voice or big sweeping hand gestures whenever I spoke. But whatever the reason, it wasn't just Italian I felt, it was a specific Italian, a 1950s Italian. While growing up, the major influences of my thinking were my Italian grandparents, Silvio and Lydia Sacco. With their young family, they immigrated to Canada in June of 1958 and settled in Welland, Ontario. My father was only 18 months old at the time. My nonni left their home and farm in Colladata in the province of Teramo, Abruzzo, to forge a better life for themselves and their young growing family. This notion of being a 1950s Italian wasn't introduced to me until my cousins from Italy came to visit us for the first time in 2004. These three cousins grew up in a suburb of Rome, and when my cousins walked into my nonni's house for the first time, they were in awe of what a blast from the past this home was. Good thing we had long since removed the protective plastic off of the couch. So what my Italian cousins saw was a family who left Italy in the 1950s trying to preserve their identity in whatever way they could. Among some of the observations were they still make their own wine. Wow, look how big this garden is. This cantina has everything. Look at the prosciutto hanging and all the sauce. They make their own cheese. Oh, che figo, you know, how cool. Little did they know how difficult and really not entirely legal it was to get unpasteurized milk in Ontario in order to make this cool cheese. All these things seem normal to me and any other Italian Canadian person that I knew. But speaking with my cousins, it became clear that these practices were more of a history lesson and something to cherish. Italian culture and lifestyles continue to evolve over time. However, to those who left in 1950s to start a new life in a very different country, holding on to these traditions was something that felt comfortable, familiar, and safe, while living so far away from their native land. My nonni were always eager to share their Italian traditions with me. However, winemaking often proved elusive. Many 1950s Italian immigrant families had demijohn or two of wine in the basement. We had at least 10. I always wanted to make wine with my nonni, but living in Toronto and then in Niagara, it was something that I wasn't always able to participate in. I remember always visiting in September, often missing the big part of winemaking day. I would just say, why can't you just wait for the weekend for us to come and then we could help you out? And my nonna's response would be when the moon is ready, we make the wine the next day. But you can still help turn the crank. So luckily, one year, the moon was on my side and we made the wine on the weekend. Ask any nonna what her recipe is for something and she'll say a little bit of this, a little bit of that, or as my nonni liked to say, dipende. So nonna, how much flour to add? Dipende. Nonna, how many eggs? Dipende. As you can imagine, this makes it hard to recreate some traditional dishes like timbolo, scrippellembos and gnocchi. Instead of asking for the recipe, you must make it with them. Everything depends on the feel. If it's too dry, then you add a bit of water. If it's too wet, then you add some flour. Maybe it needs another egg. How do you know? The feel. So when I read this now, I realize how much of what I learned growing up wasn't verbal. It wasn't taught through instructions or written recipes. It was about presence, about observing, about timing, sometimes literally according to the moon. My nonni didn't sit down and talk to me about identity or heritage. They simply lived it. And by being with them, cooking, eating, showing up, I absorbed something that stayed with me long after. I didn't sit down to write this thinking I was uncovering anything extraordinary. It was just the backdrop of my life. Writing this piece slowed me down enough to really look, to see how much was being held in these routines, that house and those relationships. What I've learned through writing this is that we all come from our own versions of time capsules. And funny enough, just a few weeks ago, I learned it's also known as cultural fossilization, which I think is kind of interesting. Maybe it's a grandparent's kitchen, a family ritual, a way of doing things that was learned by watching. What writing made clear to me is that these kinds of stories are already around us. They live in habits, in gestures, and in the way we move and the way we speak. Sometimes all that is required is to take the time to notice and to put words to what has shaped us. This story is a thank you to my nonni, to my family, and to the generations that came before me. Sharing this experience has reminded me that these stories don't only belong to us, they become richer when they're shared. So Transformations Canada creates space for this kind of reflection, and I hope others feel encouraged to share their own experiences as well. Thank you very much.
Powerful stories, all of them. And they reveal what it means to have Italian genetics, but they also reveal great lessons about our humanity. What powerful human stories. The importance of family, and the importance of building something so the family can grow. And we're here this evening, therefore, to celebrate not only these stories, which are just examples of what's in the collection. There are 202 stories in the collection, and there are people that are still interested in sharing their stories. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, all I want to say is, please remember, history begins at home. Record. Take the time to record the family stories. Don't let them die with the immigrants and the elders that were the storytellers. I know life keeps us busy. I know life keeps us distracted. But find the time to record the stories before it's too late. And as these examples will show, the stories of what we have experienced as Italian immigrants in this country and what we have done in response to it are powerful stories that deserve to be remembered for many generations to come. So there are books available if you're interested. There are some posters for Italian Heritage Month. And thank you so much for your attention once again this evening. If we can be of further service through the National Congress of Italian Canadians, Toronto District, look us up. But I want to call up the final speaker this evening, a former student of mine at Madonna High School a couple of years ago, Silvana Tibolo, who will now represent the National Congress of Italian Canadians, the National District.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here this evening. I know many of you attend our events on a regular basis. I also want to particularly thank the partner organizations that have been with us from the very beginning. Centro Scuola, which was my first part-time job, teaching with Alberto Di Giovanni many, many years ago. And CIVPA and a few others, I'm sorry if I missed them, but like Angelo said, I remember when Michael went to the meeting to present this project, he came back and he said, oh, I met the person that's coming, forward with this. Really smart guy. He's a real historian. And he said the name, and I thought, well, there's not too many people that are called Angelo Pilotta. I go, I think that was my grade 10 teacher. And sure enough, here we are, full circle. So I really want to thank all of you, all the families that have shared their story. And if you haven't shared your story, like Angelo said, please continue to do so. While we have a published version of the first and second copy, somebody approached me on the national level and said, well, the future generations, they don't really open a textbook anymore. And I said, we've already thought about that, so you can go online and you can do all your inputting online. So we've got that covered as well. As far as the national entity, like Angelo mentioned, we are coast to coast to coast. And 2 years ago, the national district celebrated its 50th anniversary. And we thought we'd do something a little bit different to remind us of what, as Italian immigrants, our community went through. So rather than start in Halifax, we started a journey by train in Vancouver and went across Canada and had our last visit in Halifax at Pier 21. And my mom, who at 89 years old, sometimes you have to really coax her to want to do things. She still talks about that trip. And like you said, every one of those stories is so important. And just to share a few personal things, the stories that my mom and my dad shared with my children and my nieces and my nephews over the years, they've heard them over and over again. And 2 years ago, when my daughter got married in Italy, we happened to take my mom with us, and we went to visit their hometown, which was a wish of my dad's. Unfortunately, he didn't live to see it. And she walked with all 13 grandchildren through the town, telling her who lived at this house and who lived at this house. And this is where Nonno used to spy on me, and we used to meet getting the little pail of water, et cetera, et cetera. And the kids just thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed that. And, as an update, my children now, who have all moved on and have their own lives and their own children and what they're doing, their hashtag for their Wi-Fi at their homes is Sugo Sunday. So if I want a quick response from them on a Sunday, I just say, it's Sugo Sunday, any takers? And within minutes they respond. If I ask anything else, forget about it, right? And then my youngest daughter, who's probably, I would say, the most Canadianized of the group, she's all of a sudden taken on this interest. And thanks to the Toronto district there, and she took on the challenge of presenting a poem that she wrote for her grandmothers that they presented at the women's breakfast. I remember that they all went to school in Nova Scotia, and she happened to call me one night. She says, Mom, I need a recipe. I said, okay, what are you trying to make? She said, pasticcetti. I said, what? She goes, pasticcetti. I said, you won't even come into the kitchen when I make pasticcetti. She goes, I just have this urge for pasticcetti. What's the stuff you put in it? And sure enough, now that's her peasant food that she really enjoys. So, like we said before, all of these stories are all relevant. They're stories of courage, of resilience, of perseverance, and thank you for sharing them with us and with the world, because that was the objective of this, that, you know, all the people that are here have these stories as well, and we need to be cognizant of that before we start judging people. For us as kids, even if we didn't have friends at school, it didn't matter, because we went home and we had our cousins. Those were our best friends, right? We always could turn to our cousins. And young immigrant families now are going through the same thing, so let's not forget about them either. Thank you, buonasera. And just a quick reminder, one more thing, sorry. This weekend in Vaughan, they're celebrating Festitalia. National Congress will have a booth. Angelo will be there with his books as well. The National Capital District is there just for representation. So we invite you to be there. And on Tuesday, we have been invited to the Parliament in Ottawa, and we are presenting the copies of the book to the Library of Parliament. So congratulations. Thank you.
Okay, folks, thank you for coming. Celebrate your Italianità, Canadian style.